tell you about.
Gotcha. All right. So, why don't you start off with, go ahead and say your name.
I'm Shirley Culver.
Okay.
I was born into the Didrik and Hazel Bowman family in 1925, and my brother was 2 when I was born, and we had a wonderful relationship. My memory goes back to age 2, and I remember different things that we bought. I remember when we bought a refrigerator. We had had an ice box on our back porch before that time, but I remember them deciding where they were going to put the refrigerator because we had a very small kitchen, so they put it in a corner of the dining room. And shortly after that, we got a new living room suite, and I loved it because it was Ypsilanti kind of weave that was very popular back in the 20s, and it had a fringe around the lamp. It had a big round lamp, had a lamp table and this big round lamp, but all this pretty fringe hanging down off of it, and if you moved it with your fingers, it would sway back and forth. I thought that was really terrific. I remember we must not have had a car part of the time when I was about that age.
How old were you then?
2.
You were 2 and you remember all this?
And I remember riding to church on my father's shoulders.
Wow.
And he would hold Parker's hand, and before that they took turns staying home with us, and when it was his time to stay home, he always cooked what I called goulash, which was a tomato mixture with cheese and bread and baked. And I thought that was, and still love it to this day. So when I want some, I have to cook it because other people don't have the same fond memories that I have of goulash. I remember at that time they were building Highway 2570, and they had hoped to take it around the mountain, but a lady wouldn't give up her porch, so they would have had to take her porch off. So Mrs. Silvers wouldn't give them her porch. So they decided to take it up by our house, which meant we were right on the highway.
Right.
But they were building the thing, and there were men who were working there. Some of them had stripes, some of them had a ball and chain. And I remember my parents telling me they were like that because they had done something bad. But one day, one of the men, back at that time, toothbrushes were made out of celluloid, and that was smellable. So one of the prisoners one day called me over to the fence, and I went over, and he gave me a ring made out of an old toothbrush, and it was striped, and I remember thinking that he might have been bad, but he was good too. So that was one of my first revelations, an aha moment, an epiphany, if you will, and I thought that was wonderful. We used to spend a lot of time at my grandparents'. My grandmother was somebody that I admired as I grew older. I loved her when I was young, but I admired her so much in my later years. And I guess one reason is I look a little bit like her. But she was a large woman with a nice lap for little children to sit in. And she had beautiful wavy hair. Most of it was done up in a bun in the back. But it was, when she would let it down, it would go around her shoulders. And she was you could depend on her. She and my father were 2 people who made you feel very secure. And I appreciated that as the older I got, and looking back on times. My grandfather was a very sweet old man. He should have been born today instead of when he was, because he was a mountain music man. He played any instrument they said he had ever picked up. he could play. And I remember him playing the piano back when I was little, and big gnarled hands from farming. And he played, well, mostly hymns, things like that, but music was very important to him. And he would have made a good living out of his guitar and violin and piano today, rather than having to be a mountain farmer, make a living off the mountains.
Yeah, did you have any siblings?
I had a brother who was 2 years older than I, and we were together up until he was 19, I was 17. He was in a military school at the time and was slated to go into the Army that June, but he got sick. He had a cancer and died.
When? Wait, when did he die?
He was 19 when he died. He came home for Thanksgiving and didn't feel good and had flu, they thought. And all during the holidays, he and his girlfriends just sat around our house mostly, talking and enjoying each other. She was one of my best friends and a beautiful, lovely girl. And he dressed to go back to school. He was in military school, Oak Ridge Military Academy in Kernersville, North Carolina. And he always went outside the house, stood on 2570 and thumbed, and he got a ride immediately because of his uniform, school uniform. So he always thumbed his way back and forth. A lot of people thumbed then.
Right.
Unacceptable now.
Mm-hmm.
Not safe anymore, but I lived in a safe time. And he was really good looking, and we double dated. His friends were just right for me, and mine were just right for him. So mostly we would have our dates around the house. A gang usually would come, and we would clear off the dining room table and turn it into a ping pong table.
That sounds like a blast. What year were you born?
What?
What year were you born?
25, and he was in 23. Okay. My parents were married in 21.
How did that, was that really hard for your family when he died?
Oh, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to endure. Really. To this day.
Really?
It's rough.
Do you think about it?
Because we were so close. If we hadn't been so close, it probably would not have affected me so. But in fact, I had planned, I was a sophomore in college at the time. He was a junior. And I had planned to transfer to Vanderbilt my junior year. I went to Queens College in Charlotte, now Queens University. And by the time it came to shifting schools, I was in no mood to make a change, so I went ahead and finished up my 4 years at Queens.
What'd you study at Queens?
Pre-med.
Okay, gotcha. And so
chemistry major.
So what was your job then, like after college?
Well, I had planned to go on to school, but I just was kind of tired of school, so I decided to knock it off for a year and get a job. And it was hard for women to get in mid-school in that day and time. And I had enjoyed my college years, and I didn't make all A's.
Pre-med, that's pretty
So,
tough.
story of my life.
How'd you meet your husband over there?
Well, when I decided not to go back on to school, I looked around for a job, and I had an offer from Oak Ridge, so I took it and went over. And
For the Manhattan
it was
Project,
kind of Oak Ridge was rather a shock to me, because when I went over, they had the women lived in dormitories, but they weren't like the dormitory I had at school, and it was I was not there when it was so muddy. They had put in streets and so forth by the time I got there. And so this was in 45. The war broke out my freshman year in school in 41, the December of 41. And then it was just on the tail end of the war when I finished in 45. So I got to experience all of my college years during the war. And then I got to, at Oak Ridge, I got to work on the nuclear bomb before it was dropped. It was an interesting time because I didn't realize it at the time, but I was in a lab that was the most exclusive, latest thing. A lot of the silver had been melted and used up into instruments and so forth. So I analyzed uranium. So I started at the top and worked myself down.
Wow. How long did you work there for, or like work? I guess how long was the Manhattan Project?
Well, it was a long time, but I was there just a year. I was in the lab when I first went there. They gave me a job that had to do with some readings off of machinery, and it was not what I had trained to do, and I was not happy with it, so I went to the job office and told them I wanted a different job. And then I went to the dormitory and told them I wanted different roommates. So I got both. It's the first time I realized that wheel that squeaks gets the oil. So I got both of those, and when I chose my lab, I didn't realize that it was probably the most exclusive lab in the project at the time.
Did you realize that just like when you were young, or is it just like, was it just kind of like, for you, was it like, or is it just?
Well, it did not look like much. They were building a new building, and so this one was the most important probably of all their labs. And Julian came in first day I was there. I don't think I got in the door much before he got there, and he asked me out. So I went, and he kept on asking me out and asking me out and asking me out. So we finally got married. We met in October, and we got married in February.
Wow.
We had really thought that we'd get married in December, but my mother thought it was a little too soon.
Yeah, maybe. How old were you when you got married?
20,
20. How old was Julian?
26.
Okay.
He's the oldest man I ever dated.
Hey, I'm 26 now. Easy. What was your guys' first date like? Do you remember your first date?
I think we went out on the school grounds and sat in the swing and talked.
Really? Was that warrant enough for you to give him a second date?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was better than going to a movie, or at least we got to know each other.
Right. What are some of the things that even then or even now, like, I guess, make you love Julian?
Things that we enjoy together?
Yeah, well, things you enjoy together, things you love about him, and stuff like that.
Well, one of the things, believe it or not, that was important to me was hands. His hands were clean. His fingernails were immaculate, and they still are. So that's a strange thing to find that you like. And I was from a rather quiet family. We were not real talkers, and Julian was from a talking family. His mother had 6 sisters and 1 brother. And those 6 sisters could get in the kitchen all talking at the same time, and I don't know whether any of them heard the others or if they just kind of had this synchronization that they could tune in on anyone. But it was interesting, and they all talked. And I don't think he got too much of a chance when he was little, but he has been talking ever since.
You can tell a little bit, but.
And I didn't realize when we were first dating that he was super active, and I thought it was just because we didn't have any place really to go. Could go to the public library and sit and bore each other or what. But after we were married, I realized that was a way of life. He was going to be super
Active in what sense?
active.
Just like always working, always running, always doing something.
Always working, busy, plans his time, uses it. You hope you have enough energy to keep up.
So what was like some stuff you guys really liked? Like, tell me about your wedding. What was that like?
Well, my mother made my dress. We had gone to look for material in Asheville, and they didn't have any that I wanted anywhere. But we went to a little offbeat material shop, and they said that they had a shipment of silk coming in, satin. If I wanted to wait till the train came in, and they would see if it came in, and it did come in. So Mother made my dress, and both my daughters have worn the same dress. So it was a 3-time winner.
So you told me about that, but what about married life? What was that like? You kind of hinted at working on the Manhattan Project and stuff like that, but what was it like? What was it like with your kids? Tell me about your kids. Tell me first about what married life was like for you and Julie, and then go into stuff with your children.
We were married in the Marshall Presbyterian Church by a beloved minister that we had been real close to for a number of years. And we went to Asheville to spend the first night, and then we went to Atlanta after that and spent several nights there, and then went to, all this was by bus because we had no transportation. Cars hadn't been made in quite a while back during the war. And we went to Gatlinburg and for a day or two, and then we went to our little house, which was called a Victory Shack over at Oak Ridge, and it consisted of 2 rooms. The kitchen, dining, living room was one tiny room, and the bedroom consisted of 2 single beds pushed together. And you couldn't get around the perimeter very well. There was a chest of drawers. You could barely pull the drawers out. And there was a bathroom with a shower, and 2 people could get in the bathroom, provided one was in the shower. So, and it was tiny, and it had the essentials were like a card table and 4 chairs. A little stove that had been a cook stove changed into an oil stove, and a tiny little refrigerator. And we were there from February to May. But it was, you can see pictures of these little Victory Shacks when you look at some of those old photographers.
I'll check those out for sure. But tell me how many children did you have?
We have 3.
Okay.
Janine's the oldest, and David is 6 years younger, and Linda is 9 years younger.
Okay, tell me about them.
Well, they were a pleasure. Lots of fun to have. I think David in particular, I enjoyed watching his humor develop, because he if you know him real well, he has a great sense of humor, and it was a joy just to share this funny papers on Sundays. We would all pile in the bed, and I'd read the funny sheets too. But he was, if I'd known then that he was absorbing everything that went into his living, I probably been more cautious. But he remembers nearly everything in great detail. So if you interview him, you might be able to bring some of that out.
What about your other children?
My what?
Your well, I don't know their names, but your other children, David's siblings.
Oh, well, Linda, well, Janine to begin with had colic. She had 2 inches of red hair, and she cried most of the first 2 months. I remember being just extremely tired. But after she got old enough, so she got over colic, she was very smart. So much so, and I put things down in a book, and I later looked at them and thought, well, people are not going to believe that. And so some of them I didn't leave in my book, and I should have, because they were valid. She was very bright little baby. She was a rockabye baby. She liked to be rocked. David was not. He was too active, I think, to sit still long enough to be rocked. But I read to them, all 3 of them, every morning after breakfast for about an hour. So they all turned out to be good readers and chose good literature to read. So I have enjoyed swapping notes with them over some of the books. Linda was the sweetest little thing. She was, David was blonde, Janine redhead, and Linda had brunette hair and brown eyes, and she was the darkest skin. The other 2 are very fair. And,
Me too.
So they have to watch the sun, but Linda did better with that. But Linda was the type little child who always drawing hearts, and she has always been a love. She and David were very close. She was Tonto to his Lone Ranger, and so they always enjoyed each other.
That's really cool. That's awesome. So after the Manhattan Project and things you worked on, then what did you what was like? Did you stay at home? Were you stay at home mom?
Well, when the children were little, I was a at-home mom for 16 years. But after we left Oak Ridge, Julian had a job waiting for him with TVA because he was employed with them when he left and go into the Army.
Could you put your right arm down just because I'm getting a big shadow? There you go.
And so we went back to his job in Florence, Alabama. A lovely town. I loved the town. And we moved into a hotel, bathroom at the end of the hall for everybody. Mm-hmm. So we stayed there about a week before we got a room, and the room had no closet. It was in a nearby neighborhood. Shared a bath with 9 others. That was kind of a shock to me. I had never had to do that sort of thing before. We stayed there several weeks until we got an apartment with a lovely couple who had 3 apartments in a lovely old southern home. And they were Presbyterian and we were Presbyterian, so I think that's why we got the apartment. But they were lovely to us, and I enjoyed being with them. They were. And then Julian decided he didn't want to continue working for TVA, so he wanted to go back to school. So he figured that if I worked and he went back to school and got his GI Bill, that we could make it. And I didn't realize that the GI money was not going to come in at the when we first needed it. But when we ended up there, we got a one bedroom. We rented a bedroom and ate out for a couple of weeks. And then we got a sort of an apartment, we might call it. It was in a big old house. We had to share the kitchen with the owner and her two sons, but we had a living room and a bedroom, but we had to share the bath with the family. And they were really lovely, lovely people. I enjoyed being with them. And it worked out. And then he decided, he originally thought he'd planned to get a doctorate. And then he decided, no, he didn't want to do that. He'd stop after he got his master's. So he stopped, and once more we hit the road, and he found this job here in Morristown with American Inca being chemist, and he was with them for, I don't know, 20 years or more.
We need to take a break to greet your friends.
I don't know.
Here, we'll pause for a second. Is that okay? So you've been in Morristown for what? How long now?
Since 49.
Long time.
Long time. Well, we were out 11 years. We went back to North Carolina when my parents were elderly. And so we were there for 11 years, but came back.
Yeah, I heard about your grandparents, but tell me about your parents.
Well, my parents were interesting. My mother was very small. My father was very tall. And they met, she was a graduate of Peterbilt Brigham in Boston, nursing school, so she got a job in Lynn, Massachusetts, and her a fella from White Rock, which was a hospital, brand new hospital, was going into effect, and the doctor who was heading up the hospital interviewed her in Lynn, Massachusetts, and then asked her to join them in White Rock, North Carolina. So that's what she did. And my father was working, just driving ambulance, engine man, whatever they needed. It was his job. And she was older, much better educated. He was good looking and physically very active, energetic, had a lot of future prospects, so they became engaged and got married and moved to North Carolina. And my grandmother and grandfather owned a house just outside of town and a barn on property next to them. And they gave Mother and Daddy the property, and they borrowed the money, built themselves a little house. Mother drew the plans, and they were really up-to-date plans. Had a living room, dining room L, small, tiny kitchen, 2 bedrooms and a bath upstairs, and it was right on a creek. The back of the house joined the back of the wall on the creek. So I can remember flooded areas getting up pretty high, and on one occasion that came into the house.
Wow, that's unreal.
When you get flood blasts upstream, that's all comes down in a hurry, and the width of the creek is not enough to take care of it, so it goes overboard.
Right. What about so you hit, I know we kind of jumped backwards there, but I'm gonna jump forwards again. I guess when you guys retired, when you look back on like working and your life and stuff like that, what was like some of the big things, like kind of, best way I describe it is like words to live by. Like what do you think you learned that was like very like that was important to you?
I think when you first go to church, one of the first things they teach you is be ye kind. And I think that has struck me then as a good thing, and it has worked in my life. So there have been a lot of people that I have had a joy of working with that appreciated kindness. So that's
Yeah, and maybe I don't want this to be a morbid thought by any stretch of the imagination, but I guess in some facet you have an opportunity to. I guess if you hold on this video, you get to talk to future generations. Like, what would be something that you'd want to tell? I don't know, like I mean, you're obviously you're matriarch and patriarch of this family, right? And what would you want to tell your great grandkids? I don't know what I don't know. I know you said be kind, but just
well, I would like for them to always be considerate of other people. I think that if you can look on both sides of the question, it's of value. It does not often change your position, but it does give you a viewpoint to steer by. And if you're going to influence other people, it has to be through love. And one thing important for teachers is to love those kids, because I was privileged to have a lot of lovely kids, and lots of times I would have a quick prayer thanking God for the parents, because sometimes the kids were just so remarkable. You had to admire them. And then there were so many that would break your heart because they didn't have the advantages. But those little kids, some of the ones who were disadvantaged turned out real well.
right. Time to kind of ride.
I don't ever see my kids in the police list or anything like that.
I guess you get to see the kids sometimes rise above that adversity in a lot of
They
ways.
do.
And it's really cool to see.
And you can't ever tell. And one thing in teaching, you never can tell what happened
Right.
before they came to school. If they seem to be upset or belligerent or so forth, there's usually a good reason.
Oh, yeah, totally agree.
So understanding, giving a little extra allowance.
Well, do you have any? Have a funny story?
Any what?
Do you have like a funny story of anything that you want to share as well? Something maybe funny that you happened to you and Julian, or I don't know.
I had a young boy. He was tall for 12. Pulled a gun on me one day. He said, "Ms. Culver," and I looked at it. I thought, well, how'll I handle this? And I said, "Carl, put that gun away and turn to page whatever it was we were working." He said, "Ms. Culver, it's just blank." I said, "I don't care." Now, if I had reported that to the office, that kid would have been in hot water when he didn't need to be.
Right.
So sometimes,
Be tougher than me if you're saying, "Hey, put that away." Like you said, like some robber, like, "Hey, put your gun away, you fool."
but I knew the child.
All right, of course. That's true. That's awesome. That's cool. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add that you think would be I don't know, valuable information, or just something you kind of want to say?
Well, it's been an interesting life. I have been most fortunate in having grandparents who were loving and worked hard and made a little headway. They would buy a place and work on it for a little while, and then they would buy a bigger place and work on it. And that was sort of the tale of my life, because that happened with my mother and father. I mean, he worked as a clerk, and then he'd been there for so long. He bought the store, and after that, well, he had it made, And I think he promised Mother the Moon and almost delivered it. They were quiet, loving people, and we had an awful lot of people come to stay with us. I mean, not just a month, but maybe 2 or 3 months at a time, when most people would not have thought they had enough to be able to share. They always made room for people until, in their older years, one of their friends she was getting old, she wanted to retire and come and live with them and will them everything she had. And they hated to turn her down because she was a dear soul. She didn't have much, but they told her no. And then my Uncle Dedrick wanted to come live with them, and he had a son he should have gone to live with, but they didn't want to. They were an age then when they shouldn't have to be looking after other people. But they had so many people living with us all the time, off and on. And my mother's family, one of her sisters and the family of 4 moved in with us for a year one time during the Depression. He lost his job, and my dad gave him a job in the hardware.
Well, your family, and even after interviewing the Norse and everything from just your entire extended family, is very kind.
Yeah.
I can definitely tell that even from your story of your parents.
Well, that makes character. And you don't know any other way. I mean, everybody, they're just welcome as far as the child is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really care where they sleep.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they're loved and cared for, works out fine.
That's cool. Well,
I wouldn't make any changes.
Good. That's a life worth living right there.
Yeah. There's nothing I would do different.
And you and Julian have been married how many years now?
70 years.
Yeah. Here's my last question. Ready? You've been married for 70 years.
And I'm 90.
How the heck did you make? How the heck do you deal with someone for 70 years? Not deal.
Well, I always felt like the Lord was teaching me patience. Still is. But
I guess maybe you give some tips from the pros. I mean, you've been married 70 years. What is like? I don't know. Maybe that's the only thing. I guess tips from the pros. I'm not married and not even close to it, but I don't know. I always find it interesting to find out how the heck do you make this work? You know?
Well, you just have a lot of patience, and then you don't try to change people. I've learned that that's not possible. You just let them be them, and you try to retain enough of you to be you. So that works. That works for me.
Cool.
I try, that way you're not carping at somebody all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're married to somebody who's always giving you lesson 101, you just take it and keep quiet and go about your business and do what you're going to do anyway.
Right. Well, that's perfect. That was great. That was great, Miss Colburn.
Well, I'll turn Julian over to you.
Julian, you ready?